Increasing numbers of people are sharing amazing experiences about the results they had with their energy healing modalities. Rife, Reich, orgone, Tesla, magnetic, electrical, light, sound, scalar, quantum, crystal. The list is endless. As a result, we even see doctors sometimes supporting certain devices or frequencies to deal with all sorts of problems, including serious issues like schizophrenia and cancer. When we're using any kind of frequency technology or advising people about it, we need to be aware of fundamental issues like tolerance, secondary gain, healing crises, and the placebo effect. Without this kind of knowledge, advice can potentially cause serious problems for both therapists and clients. A third of people are cured by a sugar pill, so the experience they share will be a placebo effect, unless it works in considerably more than a third of cases. We also need to ask if complaints come back. Otherwise, the claims of success could only be temporary. And if healing effects are incomplete, will their approach work as well the second time, or will the body build up tolerance? How long do we treat for? And can we overtreat with these devices? Keep Health Mastery deals with questions like this, and we explain why devices like the ENS Plus are exponentially more powerful than PEMF devices, pulsed electromagnetic frequencies. The course also provides insights into quantum healing effects and how to apply them for yourself without thousands of hours of research and just winding up confused or spending thousands on courses. With this information, you'll be expertly equipped to deal with all the most important questions. You'll know what the different options are, what the best options are, and understand the relative advantages and drawbacks of various approaches. We even cover how to stimulate the body's own stem cell, glutathione and carnosine production, and much more, including stress, trauma, ADD, and psychological issues. Our work is based on tens of thousands of hours of research and application, and our aim is to empower users of these technologies, from doctors, clinicians, and experienced energy healing practitioners through to brand new home users. In the meantime, to save you time, stress, confusion, and money, we'll be issuing some free short videos covering the basic issues of how to choose an energy healing modality and what the pitfalls are to watch out for. So please subscribe and please share this video, as we also cover what some doctors have called the disaster of pharma-based approaches. This first presentation covers health, disease, and adaptation. This gives us the theoretical underpinnings for the rest of the course. First, I invite you to join me in a reset breath and quiet touch, or RBQT. The RBQT is an ultra-fast relaxation method, supporting heart resonance and heart rate variability. The RBQT creates a parasympathetic nervous system response, which enhances all healing modalities and eliminates stress, so it's a great support for learning too. Sit in a nice comfortable position with your eyes closed. Place your left hand over your heart, which is slightly to the left of the center of your chest. So put the palm of your left hand over your heart and see if you can detect the heartbeat. Now put your right hand over your left hand, and in your own time exhale normally through the mouth, then inhale normally through the nose, then make a full and complete exhale through the mouth, all the way. And relax. Let your hands drop down. Breathe normally and go inwards for a few seconds. Observe yourself. Have you any aches or pains? Do you have any thoughts? Just observe for a few moments. When you're ready, slowly open your eyes and return to the presentation. I'd like you to avoid taking notes, unless that's your preferred method for learning. If you want to revisit something, just note a time on the video so you can find it later. Instead, focus on understanding the material. The notes are provided in the Keep Health Mastery workbook, and there are the therapist's quick reference Pro Pack cards as well. So that work has already been done for you. Just focus on understanding and enjoying the presentations. You don't need to focus on remembering. It's my job to explain, and regular reviews will be used to reinforce the key points. Let's move on with health, disease, and adaptation, covering the environment in which our technologies are working. What do you think this is? If you believe in God, this is the ultimate miracle. This is the most detailed model ever created of a human cell. Let's admire the complexity and craftsmanship of this masterpiece for a moment. There are 10 billion individual neurons, or nerve cells, which comprise the fundamental units of the brain. Every neuron has 10 to the power of 100 interconnections. That's 10 with 100 zeros after it. That's a vastly bigger number than the number of atoms in the entire universe, which is about 10 to the power of 80. So that's this, times 10 billion. It's absolutely miraculous. There are up to 70 trillion cells in a human body, and that's approximately the number of stars in 100,000 Milky Way galaxies. And we're only talking about the quantity of cells. If we consider each cell's biooperations, the numbers increase exponentially. In terms of renewals performed by the body, bone cells take 3 months, skin cells about 2 weeks, colon cells 7 days, and red blood cells replace at the rate of 200 million per hour. That's 50,000 cells every second for your entire life. What do you think we're looking at here? This represents electron transfers between all the chemical processes performed by the liver, and that involves 500 trillion metabolic steps per second. It's been said that to create a factory to emulate all of the steps of the liver, it would have to cover most of the surface of the entire Earth. Now let's look at the DNA. One molecule contains 125,000 nucleotide pairs, arranged in a 4-level double helix, creating a chromosome. If you were to stretch it out, that chromosome would stretch for 2 meters, and it's all held in a 5 to 15 micron space. Each cell core contains 26 chromosomes and 46 DNA molecules, each one containing enough data to fill hundreds of encyclopedias, printed with small text. Cell division takes 20 minutes, and if the DNA is a double helix, it's theorized that it needs to unwind for this process. That means the unwinding necessary for replication would have to take place at 500 rotations a second. In contrast, a Formula 1 or NASCAR car engine has a maximum of about 250 rotations a second. And we've not yet considered that the DNA needs to split and replicate all its chemical bonds, and then zip itself together again during the process. It took until 2012 for the first photograph of DNA to be produced, and what you see here is the product of that Italian physicist, Enzo Di Fabrizio. The as yet unsolved puzzle is how the DNA replicates at a seemingly impossible speed and accuracy. All we can say is that the unwinding theory is the best available at the moment. However, I think the question is worth posing as to whether the process is primarily about energy. Here's a bit of alternative theory coming in. This is Biofield imaging from Russia. Kirlian photography records energy fields projecting from living organisms. What we see is a piece cut out of a leaf, while the energetic biofield remains intact. And the X-ray image is showing the complete destruction of the top of a little boy's humerus bone. But nevertheless, he had full range of motion. The theory that follows on from this is that the energetic form comes before the physical. In any case, the process of cell division has to work everywhere in the body, all at once and all the time. It has to work immediately. It has to follow a perfect plan. And in fact, it has to be beyond the speed of light. So if the process has to work everywhere, at once, all the time, then it's fulfilling a definition of infinite. If it has to work immediately, it's also fulfilling a definition of timelessness. And if it has to follow a perfect plan, then surely it's meeting a definition of something divine. Or maybe it's quantum, and it's holographic. Maybe it's all the same, and we're just talking about different lenses for examining things. If it is quantum, we should also consider the issues of quantum non-locality, which is that something can be in one place, and nowhere, and everywhere, at the same time. If so, then being in a particular place is simply an outcome of measurement, at a certain place, and a certain time. We can also consider that things could be quantum entangled, and that means they can be separated and separate, but still have a direct connection between them, as if they're exactly the same, with the result that they perform exactly the same way and at exactly the same time. One of the great experiments in this area is the double slit experiment. There are some great videos on YouTube about it. Another of the most interesting experiments is the photon experiment, where a photon was fired down a tube and physicists measured how quickly it travelled. Next, a photon was made to travel through an obstacle course, and the physicists measured how long it took to traverse the course. What they did next was to take one photon, split it, and fire one half down the direct route and the other half down the obstacle course. And what they found was that both photons emerged at exactly the same time. That's because of quantum entanglement. Many fascinating experiments have taken place in this area. The principle of quantum superposition is that one thing can have the characteristics of something very different at the same time, depending on how we look at it or measure it. As one example, light can be both a wave and a particle. At the moment, scientists don't understand the mechanism at work here. But if it's a mechanism of communication between quantum entangled particles, then it has to be at least 10,000 times faster than the speed of light. That's 10,000 times faster than 186,000 miles a second. So that would be 1.86 billion miles a second. In this context, we need to consider that every body comes from only one fertilized cell, which then divides and differentiates to create a 70 trillion cell body. And that means it's quantum entangled. The DNA itself is a crystal, and it has all the attributes of a crystal that would have been very familiar to our grandparents. Crystals were used in radios, and the function of the crystal was as a transmitter and receiver of energy. We also need to consider the little device we squeeze when we want to create a spark to light a gas stove, and that is using a piezo crystal. In that case, squeezing the crystal releases energy. So crystals are at the core of the DNA, and crystals are transmitters, receivers, and stores of energy. And in this case, we can also consider coherent energy to be a form of information. DNA also has water at its core, which, as we know from the work of Dr. Emoto, can change structure according to the frequencies it is subject to, including music, prayer, and thoughts. So what does the DNA do? DNA is responsible for coding proteins, and the impression is, that's it. However, even if scientists rearrange the features on a tadpole, the developing frog will end up with a frog-like face, because the DNA acts as a corrective protein coding mechanism, working to an energetic template. All cells communicate with each other using bioelectricity and light, as we will see later in this presentation, to create cell differentiation in an embryo, for example. This means that each cell not only receives information about how it will differentiate, but also about the template of the entire organism that is being constructed. Effectively, even without a nervous system, early cells operate on the basis of electrical networks. These networks process information using pattern memories, containing representations of large-scale structures, including limbs and organs. So the cells are acting like a brain, even without a neural network. The conclusion is that the cells are using an electrical language, and this explains why flatworms can regenerate in their entirety when they can be cut up into 200 pieces, each one generating a complete new organism. To do that, every piece must know what the whole organism looks like. Scientists can now manipulate the energy field so that the cells produce two-headed flatworms. Given that the DNA has not been edited, conventional theory would dictate that if we cut them into three, or just cut both heads off, they would regenerate into a normal-looking flatworm with one head. But that is not what happens. The energetically manipulated versions regrow to make two-headed flatworms again. So it's the energy, not the DNA, that appears to be controlling the regenerative conversation. And the information for this is not in the genome. As a result, scientists are already creating new creatures using energetic manipulation, electrically, to make functional new creatures from frog skin cells, for example. The scientists involved believe this will enable bodies and organs to regenerate, something we know already happens with the aid of our kind of energetic devices. Most Western scientists seem to have largely limited their research to the small percentage of DNA responsible for coding proteins. However, a group of Russian scientists led by biophysicist and molecular biologist Professor Pyotr Garyaev teamed up with linguists and geneticists to study the effects of vibrations and words on human DNA, an area now known as linguistic wave genetics. They found that information is stored in DNA, the same way it is stored in a computer's memory, and genetic code uses grammar and syntax rules in a way that is very similar to human language. Even DNA base pair structures follow rules of grammar and syntax. DNA can therefore be modified and rearranged by words and phrases. The key is in using the right frequency. Using magnetic, electric, or electromagnetic frequencies and modulated light frequencies, the Garyaev team were able to influence cellular metabolism and even correct genetic defects. They also succeeded in transferring patterns of information from one DNA set to another. In the process, they turned frog embryos into salamander embryos, using laser frequencies to transmit the information. This may explain why suggestion and hypnosis have such a powerful effect, as DNA is naturally programmed to respond to words, which esoteric and spiritual leaders have described for millennia. The study also helps explain why the same effects don't work equally for everyone, as communication with DNA requires the right frequency, and people with developed internal processes are more able to consciously create a communication channel with DNA. In the process, the scientists also discovered the genetic basis of intuition or hypercommunication, a situation where a person suddenly receives information from an external source, outside their personal knowledge base. The three major factors that inhibit hypercommunication are extremely common: tension, anxiety, and brain hyperactivity. For ant colonies, hypercommunication is inherent in their daily existence. So when a queen is removed from a colony, the workers continue to work and build according to plan. However, if she's killed, all work stops immediately. So as long as the queen is alive, the colony members appear to have access to her consciousness through hypercommunication. They also discovered that DNA can create magnetic wormholes, miniature versions of Einstein-Rosen bridges. These bridges are hypothesized to connect different regions of the universe and allow for the transmission of information beyond space and time. If we consciously activate and manage these connections, we can use our DNA to transmit and receive information from the universe's data network and reach out to other members of the network. This also means that changes occurring with the Earth, Sun, and galaxy also impact human DNA. It's been hypothesized for some time that this connects to consciousness and DNA upgrade events, which occur in regular stages, rather than the smooth manner the theory of evolution might imply. Astronomer Edmund Halley suggested that passing through a photon belt was connected with DNA upgrade events on Earth, and that this happens every 24,000 years or so. In fact, it's happening again, right now. The results of applying linguistic wave genetics by Professor Garyaev and his team have included curing previously incurable genetic diseases, including cystic fibrosis, epidermal bullosis, and Down syndrome, quantum programming of stem cells to produce specialized cells for regenerating teeth, the pancreas, and intestines, and restoring sight, inhibition of aging, and even partial rejuvenation, including the return of the menstrual cycle to women around 70 years of age. A nerve gene was also imprinted into stem cells, transforming them into neurons, which were used to regenerate a brain damaged by injury, and transmission of a gene from nerves of the cerebral cortex to program and renew stem cells in rats, demonstrating remote quantum control of stem cell differentiation. The condition of coherence in the body is called homeostasis, and homeostasis is a state of biological stability, at the same time employing a dynamic, changing state of equilibrium. So it's holding two very different characteristics simultaneously. Consider this example of biological stability and dynamic equilibrium. We've all seen pictures of ballerinas, gymnasts, and acrobats remaining perfectly still and in balance for seconds. But is that really the case? If they were to balance outside, they'd be subjected to wind and breezes. These athletes don't just have superb muscular control, they're also able to adjust very quickly when they're becoming out of balance, which means they must also have acute awareness of the point of balance and fast responses to those subtle movements. Let's compare this to the thousands of old people ending up in hospital each year due to falls. They have less awareness of an acute point of balance, and we can expect the information flow and reactions to imbalance to happen more slowly. And maybe in those situations, the adjustments can also overcompensate. So they're neither fast enough nor accurate enough to avoid a fall. Let's now consider the situation of plantar fasciitis, which is where we have an unstable ankle leading to a falling arch in the foot. One of the solutions is for people to use a wobble board. In this situation, the ankle is subjected to tiny random forces, to re-establish not just the strength and conditioning of muscles and tendons, but also testing and honing the sense of balance at the same time. So, if we have a better awareness of our sense of balance and quicker reactions when moving out of balance, we should also have a smaller and faster adjustment that is more accurate to restore the state of balance, and adjustments that are more elegant and precise, requiring less energy. This is my analogy for how ENS technology works. All living systems are semi-open, which means they have their own integrity, but at the same time they maintain homeostasis by constantly exchanging substance, energy, and information with an ever-changing outside world. This applies to our planet and to our bodies. And the buffer between the inside and outside world relies on a system of adaptation. The process of adaptation ensures the state of complete harmony and coherence between the living system and the universe, its environment. Let's consider an example of a simple system. What we see here is a controller feeding information and instructions to the system. The system is subject to disturbances, such as a sudden gust of wind. The system then produces results in that situation which are measured. The measurements are fed back into the controller. The controller then sends instructions to make the necessary adjustments, and so it continues. So a system is anything that acts in a different way to its individual collection of parts. A liver doesn't behave the same way if it's taken out of the body, nor does a heart. It's all the elements operating together in the body that creates a system. So the system creates integrative control. It integrates all the information from inside and outside. And this means it can adjust its internal environment, restoring balance for self-regulation, whether it's to do with temperature or blood sugar and insulin levels, for example. It's on this basis that we can consider adaptation to be natural healing, and that disease manifests as a state of ill health only if adaptation is failing. So, using this lens, disease is a necessary attribute of life and completely natural for a living system. In fact, we can say that it's essential for survival because it's integral to evolution itself. This is because, in the process of adaptation, the system matures and devolves, and in the process it gains greater awareness and increased capacity to deal with the unexpected. Let's look at the three diagrams at the top of the page now. We see three examples using exactly the same stimulus, in this case an illness. At the top left, the stimulus is coming into a coherent, ordered system. Some time passes. There is a normal response, which is a fast reaction to establish a new state of balance and a new level of coherence within the body. When we look at the center graphic, we see disease represented as a slow adaptive response. Exactly the same stimulus comes into a different body, maybe one that has low energy, another sickness, parasites, aging, or other issues acting as drag factors. We get a longer adaptation period, a period of noise in the middle, and the result of that is a bigger reaction, and ultimately a delayed but completed response, and so the establishment of a new order. In the case of chronic disease, the same stimulus doesn't result in the normal response. In this situation, we have the creation of noise, the passing of time, and the creation of more noise. The body can't establish new coherence because of a situation of suspended pathology, perhaps relating to exhaustion, stress, parasites, the impact of medication, or poor diet, so the cycle can't be completed. This can happen due to all sorts of issues. So we can now account for different results from exactly the same stimulus in different situations. This explains why we can have one person getting a virus and having almost no reaction at all, while someone else may be having a 24 or 48-hour illness, while yet another person can have a much more severe response. In the case of chronic illness, the cycle of disease can't complete. So what we're getting at here is that disease is an inadequate and slow adaptive reaction. The slower the adaptation, the stronger the disease. And that disease is a cycle. It needs to run full circle from the start to the end. And if it doesn't, and the cycle is interrupted, that indicates chronic disease. There's a blocked reaction. In a chronic situation, the body starts to manifest the symptoms. The symptoms might become severe, or last a long time, and eventually it goes into remission. We know from using our technologies that we can wake up the body from that state, and if we do, the first thing it does with extra coherence, information and energy is to fight the disease. In the process, it raises all the symptoms of the illness. Knowing this helps to drive our treatment strategy of chronic illness, and we'll be covering that later. At this stage, we need to help the body to push through the process as quickly as possible, so the disease can be eliminated and the new order created. This means that we can now view remission as the stage where the body is at its lowest ebb. It is so lacking in energy and coherence, it's not even able to raise the symptoms. So remission is not an indicator that an illness has somehow gone away. Quite the contrary. Let's look more closely at the cycle of illness and consider a situation we will all be familiar with. First of all, we get an itchy, peppery feeling in the nose due to inflammation of the mucous membranes. Then it moves down to the throat and the glands, and we think, this is going to be worse than I anticipated. Then we develop a general reaction, so the whole system begins to suffer, and the body raises a temperature to eliminate the illness. We generally feel grotty. We have aches and pains, and all sorts of other issues going on. And when that goes away and we've eliminated any toxic byproducts, we're left exhausted, because we expended so much energy in producing the fever. And when that process is completed, we rebuild our energy and return to health again, so the whole cycle is completed. What if we can intervene in this process at a very early stage to help to eliminate most of these symptoms or push through them at a much faster rate? The question is, how can we speed up adaptation and therefore reduce the drag factor on the body to speed up healing? The conclusion is that communication is the key. Let's consider adaptation as a functional system, which includes the systems responsible for general regulation, the systems responsible for regulating the entire organism. In this respect, one way of looking at the skin is that it's like a peripheral brain. It's a border between two worlds, inside and outside. It's also an organ of perception. When it gets hot or cold, we feel it. For our purposes, it's even more interesting that it's acting as a topographic chart. It's sending information to the outside relating to what's happening inside. With a total surface of about 1.8 square meters and a total weight of around 11 kilograms, the skin is the largest human organ, and that means it happens to provide lots of places for us to treat with our technology. Let's consider where the nervous system fits into the picture. We're particularly interested in the autonomic nervous system, which is divided up into two parts, sympathetic and parasympathetic, with a reticular formation, a matrix where everything is connected together, using patterns which repeat as a fractal throughout the whole body. For clinicians and home healers, this means there are lots of different ways we can approach the same problem. It's simply a question of finding the most effective places to treat. The nervous system is comprised of neurons that are wired in circuits which work on electrical energy. What we see here are the dendrites carrying information which is passed to the cell body. We see the direction of an electrical impulse being carried down the axon, which is wrapped in the myelin sheath, which acts like an insulator. And this information can interact with another cell up to a meter away. This is a basic communication mechanism comprising this reticular formation, a network where everything is connected based on repeating patterns. At this point, let's briefly look at structure in nature, because this is a concept many people struggle with. They look at nature and only see randomness. These slides show nature's application of Fibonacci sequences, which are mathematical patterns repeating in all plants and animals. And here is a picture of a Mandelbrot set. This illustrates how incredibly complex structures can arise from a simple repeating pattern, and how these can look completely random if you only look at one level. The Mandelbrot set also includes Fibonacci sequences within its form. So nature is using patterns that repeat to create shortcuts, and this is because the universe works on the conservation of energy principle. It's brilliant, it's elegant, it's mathematical, and it's biophysics in action. Let's move on to consider the functions of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems now. The eyes are controlled by a ganglion, a group of neuron cell bodies. The eye is a very interesting object. It's massively over-engineered for what most people believe is purely an optical input function. However, the flow of information in these particular nerves is two-way, and this is connected to what happens during the rapid eye movement REM sleep phase, which is the reorganization of the memory. The brain uses the eyes during sleep in the way a computer uses RAM. It downloads the data of the day, which is then sent back to the brain for reorganization and filing during sleep. We can also see that the medulla oblongata at the base of the brain performs a role that stimulates the flow of saliva, and the vagus nerve connects to various organs with the function of slowing down the heartbeat, constricting the bronchi in the lungs, stimulating peristalsis, which is the process of food movement within the body, and secretion, so digestion. It also stimulates the release of bile, and through the central nervous system contracts the bladder. And then through a chain of ganglia on the sympathetic nervous system, we have the functions of dilating the pupils, inhibiting the flow of saliva, accelerating the heartbeat, dilating the bronchi, inhibiting digestion, converting glycogen to glucose for immediate energy release, secretion of adrenaline and noradrenaline, which link to immediate action, and the inhibition of bladder contraction. In essence, we have the countermeasures here to balance out the parasympathetic processes, and enabling the body to switch from one process to another. In practice, the sympathetic nervous system rules the body during the day, and this is connected to stress, fight or flight responses, and quick decisions, which are usually completely out of control in the modern world. And the body switches over to the parasympathetic at night, and that's the stage when the body performs most of its repair and regeneration. So understanding the different functions of the nervous system becomes important. You may want to revisit this as the functions of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems relate to the protocols we will be learning about later. So, back to the nervous system and its fractal patterns forming the reticular matrix, which repeat everywhere, going through the entire body, even into the brain. Remarkably, the nerve patterns of the brain look amazingly similar to galactic bodies at the universal scale. Everywhere we look around us and within us, everything is built of patterns. Everything has structure. There is another general regulatory system we need to consider, and that's the endocrine system, also known as the hormonal or humoral system. This works on chemistry, so this is a form of communication using chemicals relating to the pituitary gland, the pineal gland, the thyroid and parathyroid, the adrenal glands, the testes and ovaries. The endocrine system produces low molecular hormones acting as neuromediators, nerve mediators. In other words, these chemicals are controllers of nerves. So these are chemical transmitting nerve controllers, which also operate to create another systemic feedback loop, helping to balance each other out. The picture here shows the nerve signal coming from the synapse and then the release of these neurotransmitters into the synaptic gap. So what we have are nerves stimulating chemical responses impacting other nerves, neuromediators. The endocrine system and the neuromediators include amines, amino acids, purine nucleotides, and peptides, especially neuropeptides, regulating the whole system of the body and specific functions. And for our purposes, we can consider this as the body's natural healing pharmacy. We can consider peptides to be smaller versions of proteins. They're widely used in cosmetics and health products, as they include collagen and creatine for younger looking skin, more elastic, more youthful. They have other interesting and important attributes as well, as they're anti-inflammatory, they're muscle building, and they're involved in destroying microbes. Peptides are also involved in regulating blood pressure and immune function. They act as antioxidants, they prevent blood clot formation, and they're involved in wound healing. So the endocrine system produces regulatory peptides that are yet another informational system. They're function specific, performing particular tasks. They form chains and cascades. They have a long lifespan, therefore they have distant and postponed effects, and they can even influence the genes. So we now have a chain of connections between the skin, the nerves, the electrical system, the chemical system, and the genes. This means the regulatory peptides are another key informational system. They have unique biological qualities and functions, and they perform a functional continuum for many activities, speeding up, slowing down, regulating. And we can consider them to be a package of programs, like computer programs. But in order to work properly, they require effective concentrations. Let's now bring in the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, who was conducting research at Stanford University's School of Medicine between 1982 and 1992. His particular area of interest was in answering whether quantum physics could explain cell processing. He found that the cell membrane acted like a computer chip, and this meant that the environment, in interacting with the cell membrane, influenced behavior and physiology, and it even turned the genes on and off. So this is a complete reversal of what many people think even today, that the genes are controlling the cells and ultimately most of the functions of the body. This is another amazing area of research with implications that would astound most people. The discovery has been validated many times since, and it helped to open up a new area of research called epigenetics, which is where frequencies, including prayers, songs, words and thoughts, can impact the genes. And naturally, because it's quantum, it can also happen remotely. Here is a third regulatory system, one most people don't know about. In 1976, Fritz Popp confirmed, because the theory goes back to the 1920s, that living systems produce coherent light in the form of biophotons. Coherence means the light the body produces is structured, so it has a consistent, logical order, so it's a form of information. This in turn created another new scientific field, quantum biology. So the body produces light, and this system provides for energetic homeostasis using structured light in a form we can think of as both energy and information. And the major source of light in living systems is the DNA itself. Don't forget, we've got those 70 trillion cells with 46 chromosomes, 2 meters of DNA, according to the conventional theory, and 3 billion DNA subunits. And amazingly, some scientists assume that most of it is junk. But biophysicists have proved nature doesn't work like that. Nature works on the conservation of energy principle. So if things seem to be massively over-engineered, then it seems very likely we don't understand them properly. And there are approximately 30,000 genes coding for proteins that perform many of life's functions. And the DNA is a crystal, a transmitter, receiver, and store of energy and information. Popp also found out that there are microtubules in the cytoskeleton of the cell, effectively light pipes in fused pairs connected by a protein arm whose task is transferring light around the body. So we have a light-based communication mechanism from the cells, operating throughout the whole human organism. Effectively, this means we've got an internet, and it's light years ahead of artificial systems. And what Popp found was that once coherence is achieved, photons travel along these light pipes as if they were transparent, so as if there's nothing there at all. This feature is known as self-induced transparency. The implication is that there can be a powerful, short pulse of light with zero informational loss or distortion working throughout the whole body. So the microtubules going from each cell create globally coherent waves within the body, which is known as superradiance. In practice, this means a coherent and collective interaction with a light emission, an instant, coordinated, whole-body response. Finally, let's look at energy in terms of electricity, which is probably what you expected when you started this presentation. Each cell is optimized to work at around 70 millivolts, so it acts like a small wet cell battery. Typically, aged cells operate at around 50 millivolts, and when cancer is present or a cell is sick, it typically operates at around 15 to 20 millivolts. Cellular energy drives ATP production, adenosine triphosphate, the energy molecule of the cell, also oxygenation, cell metabolism, and consequently waste removal. Inadequate cellular energy means the operations are weaker, which in turn means a weaker cell and ultimately disease. Each organ also has its own particular frequency. The first, third and fifth notes on the musical octave vibrate in harmony. The first, second and third do not. Our organs work in a similar way, each having different but complementary frequencies at which they resonate. This means the human body harmonics work like an orchestra. Very different organs, cells and functions, but perfectly resonant and harmonic. Effectively, each cell acts as a transmitter and receiver, and this means that when we subject each cell to a polarized electromagnetic field with a range of resonant frequencies, each cell or organ can pick up on that particular frequency and assimilate that particular energy. This means that the cells can be both stimulated and harmonized as a result. And incredibly, this electrical field has now been shown to be as strong or stronger than a lightning bolt. Much of this theory goes back to George Lakhovsky, who is still subject to widespread debunking, including on Wikipedia. However, the fundamental aspects of his theories have now been proven by scientists working in the area of biophysics. Lakhovsky explained the importance of broad-spectrum harmonics, which is how ENS mode works, by providing a very wide range of microresonances to the body. In addition, Lyman, Merkatz and Carli found that HIV could be destroyed using frequencies. In another study, Sankey demonstrated that a virus capsid, which is effectively the outer coating it needs to operate, could be destroyed by frequencies. And Kirlian et al. Demonstrated that AC fields can be used to disrupt cancer replication. So, why isn't this mainstream? It's a good question. In the 1950s, Congressman Charles Tobey enlisted an investigator of the Interstate Commerce Commission to investigate allegations of conspiracy and monopolistic practices on the part of Big Pharma. This came about because the son of Senator Tobey developed cancer and was given less than 2 years to live. However, Tobey discovered alternative options, received treatment and duly recovered. This is when evidence of alleged conspiratorial practices by Big Pharma came to the attention of Senator Tobey, who initiated an investigation. This led to the Fitzgerald report, which concluded that there was a conspiracy to monopolize the medical and drug industry in order to eliminate competing approaches. The Fitzgerald report was submitted into the Congressional Record on August 3, 1953. While some people dispute its validity, there are other factors to consider. You may reasonably say, that was a long time ago. It can't possibly be the same now. The media and politicians would be all over this. So, let's do an update. My opinion counts for nothing. Instead, let's look at the comments from esteemed doctors. In 2015, Richard Horton, editor of the British Medical Journal, wrote, "The case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue. Afflicted by studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analyses, and flagrant conflicts of interest, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance, science has taken a turn towards darkness." In 2009, Marcia Angel, editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, said, "It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published, or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as editor of the New England Journal of Medicine." Professor Ben Goldacre of Oxford University stated in a now famous TED Talk, "What doctors don't know about the drugs they prescribe," that over 100,000 people in America died from the prescription of anti-arrhythmic drugs due to publication bias. In other words, not publishing adverse study data. He also mentioned that reboxetine antidepressant trials resulted in 1 being published which was positive, while 6 which showed negative results were unpublished. All FDA trials on 12 antidepressants were also studied. They found 38 positive results and 36 negative results. However, only 3 negative trials were published, while all but 1 of the positive trials were published. Publication bias itself has been studied by looking at all the available papers, and it was found that it is pervasive. Around half of trials go missing, and it impacts all fields of medicine. and positive trials are twice as likely to be published as negative ones, which is what Professor Goldacre calls research fraud. And now Big Pharma, which has half a dozen companies making more profits than the rest of the Fortune 500 combined, is the biggest funder of political lobbying in the US, contributing over $380 million in 2023. We should bear in mind that in a historically competitive political system, it has been very difficult to win elections without the biggest funders. So what are the results of this? There is a word for it: iatrogenesis. It means death by medicine. The issues involved include the fact that 75% of mainstream media advertising in the USA is from Big Pharma. Any mainstream outlet wanting to blow the whistle on that would risk going broke overnight, so it would be a brave board to approve that kind of move. Iatrogenesis has been identified as the third leading cause of death, after heart disease and cancer. However, some authorities state that unlike heart disease and cancer, which tend to be diagnosed before death or picked up at post-mortem, this kind of information is highly likely to be underreported. The Institute of Medicine, now the National Academy of Medicine, estimated that iatrogenesis was underreported by 80 to 95%. And we also have the evidence of court cases involving huge fines for pharma companies into the billions for offences including fraud, which seems to do nothing to curb their behaviour, but more likely seen to be simply the cost of doing business. My conclusion is that there are major financial incentives to bury data and suppress competitors. After all, they spend billions to influence both media and politicians, and that buys a lot of influence. Further, the motives of companies repeatedly convicted of criminal acts that have killed millions of people and continue to do so each year do not seem very altruistic to me. Now let's summarise what we've covered here. An electrical device is ideal for interfacing with skin, which is conductive. As the skin is the largest human organ, it means we have plenty of places to treat. So our job is to find the very best places to treat. If we can detect nerve inflammation through the skin using measurement or other techniques which I will be explaining later, then we have an access point for other areas within the entire central nervous system. Effectively, we're finding the mainline station for healing central. This is facilitated by the fact that the central nervous system is wired as a matrix, which extends in repeating patterns through the whole body, and even into the brain. The central nervous system is divided into parasympathetic, which is very involved in healing and regeneration, and the sympathetic, which is more about fight or flight, and therefore stress. We can use both of those systems to help to treat the body. Because the central nervous system is also connected to neuromediators, nerve mediators, which connect directly into the endocrine system, we also have a direct electrical chemical bridge within the body as well. Both of these systems work with each other. This means that the right electrical stimulus can also produce chemicals, including neuropeptides, the body's natural healing pharmacy, and that can influence the DNA. We also know that the DNA is influenced by the environment through the operation of the cell membrane, which acts like a computer chip, switching genes off and on. We also know that the whole human body comes from a single fertilized egg cell, which contains DNA in the form of a liquid crystal, with water molecules at its core. And the properties of a crystal are as a transmitter, receiver, and store of energy and information. We know that the DNA itself produces coherent light, and that we can have a process of quantum entanglement when crystals or other things come from the same source. In turn, this means that if you treat one thing that is quantum entangled with another thing, you can stimulate the same results in both entangled elements at exactly the same time. There have been amazing experiments conducted in this area, including taking monoatomic substances in the National Physical Laboratory at Teddington in the UK, transporting quantum entangled counterparts to the National Physical Laboratory in Australia, and finding if you treated one in a certain way in the lab at Teddington, exactly the same result happened in real time in Australia. The process operated like the time didn't exist at all, not least because it happened at least 10,000 times faster than the speed of light. We also learned that the body itself has a light-based regulatory system on top of that. The bottom line is that by using electrical stimulation, our devices can send signals into the nervous system via the skin and into the cells, which also stimulate chemical responses. And if we can supply both signals or information and energy that the body recognizes, then we can stimulate adaptive responses to illness and injury. Now let's calibrate on the key points we've covered so far. Be prepared to pause the video so you can see how you do in answering the questions. When you're ready, resume the video after each question and compare your answer with mine. Above all, don't stress about remembering. That's what the workbook and the Pro Pack notes are for. Our objective at this stage is simply understanding. But let's find out how much you remember as we go along. What is homeostasis? Can you recall the key attributes using just a few words? Homeostasis is a dynamic state where the body uses constant adaptation to maintain its biological balance. And what are the three key regulatory systems of the body? The central nervous system is an electrical system, which is divided into the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. We also have the endocrine, hormonal, or humoral system, which is connected to the electrical system and which works on chemistry. And we have a light-based system, where light produced by the DNA is transported around the body by the cells as if there is nothing in its way. What insights have you got into the role of adaptation in tackling disease? The fact that the body needs to re-establish a new coherent order means dealing with illness involves an adaptive process. So anything we can do to help the process move more quickly and more smoothly is helping the body to perform in a better way. The quicker we can adapt to disease, the less energy we use. Think about the situation of maintaining balance. The finer the awareness of the point of balance and the quicker the responses, the less energy we use in restoring balance. All of which results in a more elegant, efficient, and accurate adaptive process. So adaptation is all about information and energy. And what observations can you make with respect to the cycle of disease, especially as it relates to chronic illnesses? In the case of chronic illnesses, the body lacks the coherence or the energy to be able to complete a healing process. This means that in remission, the body is actually at its lowest ebb, not even able to raise the symptoms. It's important to understand this for using technologies like the ENS. Don't worry about having to remember all of this. It's not necessary. All I want you to walk away with are the main points we covered in the questions at the end. The human body is by far the most complex part of what we'll be dealing with, so everything else we cover in the course will be a downhill run from here. So welcome to the amazing world of energy healing. I hope you enjoyed exploring some new insights into the environment with which we'll be working.